and that should be later on today. And again, we've got a really good turnout for this webinar. We've got over 200 participants registered. It really just shows the importance of us eager hosting these webinars, and we'd like to thank obviously everyone who's decided to log on, and also for our speakers today. If I could have the next slide, please, Marie. I'm not sure if you can see the next slide there. Thank you very much, Marie. There's a little bit of lag normally with the amount of people that log in on, but as you said, we've got a good range of speakers coming from Vattenfall today. It should be a really good hour or so. We will try and keep it tight to an hour. There will be an opportunity for questions to be held later on, as I said, but clearly if you can stay on to ask some questions amongst yourselves later on, that's great. Next slide there, please, Marie. So why we're doing these webinars and particularly targeted the armed forces is because obviously you guys have got the transferable skills that are really needed across the energy sector, and not only offshore wind, which we're focusing on for this particular one. But it's really felt that you guys can bring a lot to the sector with what you've learned of your time in the military, and bring it outside, thinking on your feet, ability to do that. So it's these skills that are really needed, also working in quite harsh environments at times. I said this particular webinar is focused just on wind. You can catch up on last week's webinar. If you go to www.eager.com/webinars, you can actually see the recordings on there. And obviously, if you've got any questions regarding anything related to this, you can actually contact the Eager team if you go onto the Eager website, which is www.eager.com. Okay. I'm actually going to hand over to the first speaker, which is Catherine Ellis-Jones from Vattenfall. So Catherine, over to you. And as I said, any questions, please use the chat function and enjoy the webinar.
Yeah, hi, thanks everybody. Good morning. So yeah, I'm Catherine, and I'd like to encourage all of you listening who might be thinking about changing careers and joining the offshore wind industry, or indeed any renewable industry, to do that. I'm a career changer myself. I've got a background in earth sciences. My PhD is in high temperature geochemistry, and I worked in mineral exploration for about 10 years. And maybe like some of you, apart from the sort of exciting stuff like mountain climbing stuff that I used to do, I found that what I enjoyed in my job wasn't the most obvious part of the job. And so I thought about changing. What I found I was interested in was the decision making around natural resources. Who manages them? Who should benefit from them? Who should be involved in making decisions about how we use natural resources for the benefit of everybody? So I returned to the UK about 15 years ago, and I trained as a facilitator and designer of deliberative processes, and very much focused on sustainable development. And I've worked with Vattenfall as a consultant initially, and now full-time since about 2008. And it's a really great sector to work in. So what I want to cover today is offshore wind globally, and a little recap on last week, why we're all doing this. We've had 45 degrees C in the Arctic Circle over the last few weeks. That's totally out of control, climate emergency. So you'd be doing a good thing if you join the sector as well. And looking at what kind of influences global development of offshore wind, what we're doing in the UK now, what the trajectory is, where we're going next, and where you can find a little bit of useful information about the sector. So if I could have the next slide, please. So start with this map, which is a global sort of overview of where you might expect to see some offshore wind development. You can look this map up yourself. There's loads of tools on the internet to find out more. But basically where the purple is, as you might expect, down in the southern extremities and up north as well, is the strongest wind speeds. These are the colours up to 200 kilometres offshore, measured at 100-metre hub height. And it's generally thought that wind speeds over about 7 meters per second are sort of viable, although generally modern wind farms are looking at higher speeds than that, 8, 9, 10. And you can see that obviously, any of you done some sailing, you can see where the doldrums are quite clearly there. But it's not just the wind speeds that make a difference. It's also other factors in the technical potential. So up until about now, we've really been looking at fixed bottom wind turbines. So turbines that are, as you might imagine, fixed foundations on the seabed. So that's obviously a big limit. You can't make them so deep. But this sector is very rapidly innovating, and now we have the option to start looking at projects in much deeper waters by using floating turbines. So if I could have the next slide. So the locational potential is another factor apart from the technical potential. Only a relatively small portion of projects that are technically feasible will get developed. We also look at, as I mentioned already, things like the depth to the seabed, but also what's on the seabed. Very similar, nice sandy conditions are a lot easier than seabed with loads of boulders strewn across it, for example, because any sort of irregularity adds difficulty. There's also economic potential. So are the factors in a particular country such that you can develop projects? These are massive, massive investments that are being made. Is your investment safe? Is there a good regulatory framework? Is it appropriate environmentally? Is there a good planning system that's robust? Are you going to be able to get international finance to do what you want to do? Nobody's going to chuck billions of pounds or dollars away on big projects, so it has to be safe. So you can see that you quite easily whittle down what is technically possible to what actually gets deployed. And on the right of this diagram, you can see where the sort of snapshot of the UK. So I don't know, can you see my, maybe you can't see my pointer there, can you? But at the bottom in the dark blue where it says 9 gigawatts, this is the UK situation. So currently we've got 9 gigawatts of offshore wind operating and generating electricity into the grid in the UK. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, you can look on Twitter on things like Windfall and see how much the offshore wind is contributing to UK power networks at the moment. And, you know, quite typically it's between 15 and 40%. So it is quite variable, and that's partly because offshore wind is very flexible. It can be switched on and off, and that's one of the benefits of it for regulating the network, for example. So above that, it says 10 gigawatts committed. So that is 10 gigawatts that we are in the process of building or finalizing the designs for, and they will be built in the UK. So they've been consented. That means they've got planning permission. They've got the finance ready. They're probably doing procurement now. So they've sorted out their supply chain. And if they're not building already, they're about to start building. Above that, we've got 16 gigawatts under development. Now, these include projects that are currently being thought about, being conceived. They've perhaps got a grid connection already. That's one of the first things that happened. They've got an agreement for lease with the Crown Estate, who is the body that organises where offshore the projects can go in theory. And so they're not consented yet. So they're under development. The likelihood is, or the potential is, that they will go ahead. And then above that, we've got a black line, which is 40 gigawatts by 2030. That's a UK government target. That was in their manifesto before they got elected. And above that is the 2050 net zero target. that was passed through the House of Commons at the end of last year. And that would be looking at about 75 gigawatts of offshore wind deployed off the UK by 2050, if we are to be a nation that doesn't emit carbon dioxide anymore and really starts making the huge difference for the climate that we need to. And currently, where we are now in this sort of area of 16 gigawatts under development, we've got two very large projects, Norfolk Vanguard and Norfolk Boreas, which I'll talk about in a moment there, that are in the later stages of planning. And they're sort of going through under the current regime. But we need to do things quite differently if we're to deliver these very large numbers, 75 gigawatts, going from about 19 operating and committed today. It's a huge shift in not a very long time. If I could have the next slide, please. So this is a map of where our developments are already and where they're planning to be in the UK. So you can see our projects off Norfolk are there. Other projects further north, the southern North Sea is a great place to do wind farm development, but also off Scotland. You can see there's less going on off the west coast because the sea bed falls away much more deeply and is more difficult to operate in. If I can have the next slide. So this is just a slide showing our two very large projects. These are on their own 3.6 gigawatts. That's enough power to power nearly 4 million UK homes. A very large, long offshore and quite a long onshore cable corridor. So huge work potential there. And you can find out more by going on our website. But we've been doing supply chain work in the east of England for a little while, and I'm sure Rob Lilly will talk to you a bit more about that in a second. And the next slide. This is just the slide showing the kind of spend profile over the lifetime of a project. And the next speaker after me will talk a little bit more about this again, but we've had some delays, partly because of COVID, to our planning process. So the timings of this are shifted along to the right a little bit, but you can see that there's a very intensive work goes on at the beginning when you're doing your research into the project. Lots of specialists, mainly environmental, archaeological, socioeconomic, all sorts of people get involved at that stage. Once you've got consent, you then need to go away and do really detailed design to make sure that you can meet all your planning conditions. And then you start getting the really big spend in because you need to bury your cables, you need to buy the equipment, the infrastructure that's needed, and you need to start installing it. And the build process will take about 3 or 4 years. And there are hundreds of jobs involved in that, both in the UK and abroad. And my final slide, and this is just to point out again where you can find out information. So this is from Wind Europe. They've got a really great interactive map on that where you can see the different roles that are required and where there is a sort of hub for that particular type of activity. So you don't have to work in the UK. There's all sorts of international opportunities. Okay, so I'm going to now hand you over to Edwina Slightholm, who's a colleague of mine at Baltimore. Thank you. The end. Next slide.
Okay, so thanks for having me. I'm here today to talk about project lifecycle of an offshore wind farm. If you can just move to the next slide, please. Just to give you a brief introduction to myself. So I've been working with Vattenfall since 2008. I joined the renewable industry in 2005, working originally for AMEC Wind Energy that was later purchased by Vattenfall in 2008. I'm currently a senior project manager with the company, but I actually started just on a 2-week temporary contract following my chemistry degree, so I really didn't go into the industry with any training or expectation to stay with it. But I've been very lucky that I've been had numerous opportunities for different roles in different areas of the company since that time. So I think it just shows the sort of diverse industry that it is, and the opportunities that are there. And just briefly, in terms of the skills that I've found as a project manager that are important, obviously you kind of have your standard risk management, program management, budget management, etc. But I've really found that a good, strong commercial awareness is useful, and specifically an understanding of regulatory and stakeholder requirements that are required to develop these offshore wind projects. If you can just go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to talk you through the main phases of an offshore wind farm project, and to try and kind of explain or show you that it's not sort of an easy process where we just build these things and operate them. There's a lot of work goes into it over a large time period. There was a large number of people involved, as Catherine mentioned. So the development of these projects can last up to 10 years, even in some cases more, depending on the size and the location of the project. And I'll come into the specifics of what happens in each of the phases in a couple of minutes. So the development phase is quite long duration. We then move into the installation and commissioning phase, which is typically 3 to 5 years, again, depending on the size and the location of the project. And then after the project is commissioned, we hand it over to our operational and maintenance teams that then manage the project for its project lifetime, and are then responsible for decommissioning the project at the end of its life cycle. So if you can just move to the next slide, please. So I'll just introduce you to the development phase in a bit more detail. So when we start the development phase, we really have kind of initial site feasibility studies undertaken. The main purpose of this phase is to get the project ready to move into the installation phase. So what we're aiming at here is being able to take a final investment decision to actually invest and move forward with the asset. So within this phase, we undertake survey work on the site. So we'll undertake it for environmental reasons, to inform an environmental impact assessment, which we have to submit to the authorities. But we also undertake technical studies, so wind assessment studies, foundation studies, geoscience studies, to make sure that we are able to build what we want to build there, and to help inform the cost, which then goes forward to the final investment decision. Key task within this phase is securing the necessary permit and securing a grid connection agreement. And with that comes an onshore and offshore grid connection route, and that's quite a time-consuming process. We put a lot of effort in to make sure that we pick the right route possible for the project. There's a lot of community work and stakeholder engagement work within that period, where we work with communities to make sure we offer the best solution. Towards the end of the development phase, where we kind of pick up on the procurement activities, specifically on the main asset infrastructure. And also in some markets, we have bidding into support systems later on in the development phase as well. And all of that is, like I said, building up to the preparation for the final investment decision, which includes some quite detailed design as well of the infrastructure. The duration of this phase, as I mentioned, can last up to 10 years. Typically, we see team sizes of around 50 people within the developers, but it's supported by a large number of external specialists. As Catherine mentioned, we have environmental specialists, archaeological specialists, technical specialists, and we use third-party independent resources to support us in the preparation of impact assessments and also technical studies. And some of the key roles that we can see in this phase are kind of your general project management and risk management, etc. But also we see specific roles such as permit management, some of the specialists that I mentioned before, environmental and radar. And we see roles such as procurement, health and safety, and stakeholder engagement and communications. So it's the real sort of diverse team and a real sort of breadth of different roles that take part in putting one of these projects together and taking it forward into development. And if you can just move to the next slide, I won't talk through it in detail, but it's just there as a kind of indicative organisation chart for a development phase, where you can see we sort of have clustering of different roles in different groups. So we have a blue group there for the technical support, green for financial support. The orange one there is really about the sort of specifics, so the consent management, supply chain management, land management. And the yellow is about the kind of stakeholder engagement, PRA, which is public regulatory affairs. And then you can see at the end there the grey sort of more, well, their resources, so legal, tax, accounting, procurement, insurance, they're resources that typically work across a range and number of projects all at the same time. Just move to the next slide. So this slide just gives you an overview of the installation and commissioning phase. Basically, obviously, the aim of this phase is to deliver the project and to hand it over to the O&M team, typically 3 years, could be up to 5 years again, depending on the size of the project. Large number of people involved in this phase, up to 150 people, depending on the size of the project, and also internal and external support required there as well. Similar roles to the development phase, but you do see some specific new roles coming in at this stage. So we have package management, so specific package management of the turbines, foundations, transmission infrastructure, etc. And we also see roles such as installation management, logistics and marine operations coming into play here as well. Move to the next slide, please. And then onto the operational and decommissioning phase. So this is where we manage the asset in terms of planned maintenance and unplanned maintenance. And at the end of the wind farm lifetime, we decommission the asset, remove any infrastructure that can be, and restore the seabed or make safe any infrastructure that must remain in the seabed. The typical operational period to date has been around 25 years. We will see that increasing, at least to 30 years is what we see now, and even further in the future, I'm sure. So these are long duration projects. Typically, you can see around 50 people in an O&M team for a 1 gigawatt project, and I've just put just a reference there as well to the Vanguard and Boreas projects that Catherine mentioned before. We foresee for those projects that we could expect 130 to 160 permanent jobs during the operational phase for those projects. Again, you can see some of the sort of consistent roles that we've seen through the development and installation phase, the project management, health and safety, stakeholder engagement, etc. But specific roles that we see in the O&M phase, different to the other phases, are service technicians. So a large number of the support team in this phase are service technicians. And we also see site management, so warehouse management. So you really sort of have these like localized teams supporting these projects through the operational phase. And then if we could just go to the next slide. So I've tried to give you a very brief introduction to each of the phases, but on the next slide, I've put on a link to a really useful tool that's been developed by the Crown Estate and BVG. It's an interactive tool, so if you follow the top link, you can go onto that. You can click on each of these different components of the wind farm. It takes you through the life cycle, and it gives you a really good overview of who's involved, what the cost is, what is the main purpose of each of these phases, and you can download a separate copy as well. So I'd highly recommend going onto that and looking at that to get some more detailed information. And I'll hand you now over to Rob Lilly from Vattenfall, who's going to give you an introduction to supply chain.
Lovely. Thanks, Edwina. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I'm going to be talking a little bit later on about my forces background. I went a slightly different route to Catherine and Edwina in that I came out of the military with not a lot of qualifications and just went to work in a shipyard on the Isle of Wight, and then sort of slowly managed to work my way through different roles, and I ended up in renewables more by a happy accident rather than by design. So, you know, we've all got quite a different story. So my intention is to talk around some sort of practicalities. If you can pop to the next slide, please. Really about how we do our procurement and supply chain management at Vattenfall, and really what we spend over the duration of the project, where we spend that money, what we spend it on, the government targets around sector deal and the net zero targets, who we're spending our money with, and where the opportunities are, because they're not just with us. And just so you know, what I've actually done is I've created a specific LinkedIn group for armed forces people to do with Vattenfall. And I'm going to start uploading information so that you don't have to try and memorize these slides or read them later. We can start sharing information in there specific to forces leavers, myself, Colin Brown, and Sue, and a few of the others will start posting in there with information for you. So this first slide is very much, as Edwina mentioned, talking about the sort of project life cycle. I wanted you to see where the opportunities are based on where we spend the money. So during the sort of development and construction phases, the capex side of it will spend sort of 50 to 52% of the billions of pounds that each project costs will be spent during that phase. The development and construction obviously sees the most interest from companies there, you know, because those are the first opportunities they get to come and work with us. What I would say to people is the opportunities are throughout the 30-year life cycle of the projects. So, you know, keep banging away at it. And, you know, even if you're not leaving the military for a few years, there's opportunity to be prepared for the kind of O&M phases later on. And there are so many companies that support us. You know, there might not be a direct route in with Vattenfall, but there will be opportunities with other companies that be working with us. You can see, you know, we spend a significant amount of money during the operational phase, and as we'll be based in the region, there's going to be a load of opportunities for a lot of different companies. Next slide, please. So as you can see, during development construction, you know, that money, the money is being spent, not so much of it onshore, and the majority of it offshore. But what does that actually translate to into real terms? So the onshore route, as an example, for Vanguard and Boreas, is going to be hundreds of millions of pounds. So it's not actually a small amount of money. It's actually a significant amount of money. And as you'll see as we go further on down, that's where a lot of the actual physical jobs are for people. They're actually on the onshore sections. So don't think that because that's, you know, that's the sort of skew of how we're spending the money, that there aren't opportunities there. There are. What I would say is when you look at the wind energy projects with ourselves and people like SPR and Ørsted and SSE, our projects are all very different. And as Edwina said, you know, it kind of depends a lot on seabed conditions, how far onshore, how far offshore, what type of turbines, you know. And when we're moving into the ScotWind, which is going to be absolutely massive from about 2027 onwards, those are going to be floating foundations for a lot of the projects. So that's going to result in a lot more fabrication jobs based in the north. Next slide, please. So the next slides are very much looking at how we spend our money across each specific category. So this helps you to think about, okay, so Vattenfall are spending their money with turbine suppliers, they're spending it on onshore substations, they're spending it on offshore substations. That's where the big chunks of money are. But I won't necessarily focus on those. I'll go for the less obvious. So I won't focus on just working for Vestas or GE or Siemens. You know, let's have a look at some of the installation contractors or foundation contractors or cable manufacturers. So there are opportunities in a lot more areas rather than just actually, you know, with turbine manufacturers or O&M or whatever. Next slide, please. I think that's really important for people to understand that there are many different ways and many different opportunities here. So if we look at the actual breakdown of operation and maintenance and again, where the money will be spent, a significant proportion is spent actually just on people, on managing the project, managing the maintenance. You know, on investments and equipment, you know, we'll spend a significant amount of money on servicing and logistics. So I did see a question pop up about logistics. Logistics is going to be absolutely massive for us on our project. If you look at the overview that Edwina and Catherine gave about the actual onshore cable route, it's 60 kilometres. And we're going to need to have all of the materials delivered over that 2-year installation period, pretty much all just in time. So there's going to be a significant amount of logistics and vehicle movements. I do actually have a sheet that actually programs all of the vehicle movements for our project, and I will actually share that into the military group so that the logistics people can see exactly what we're looking at doing there. And for all of the ditches and duct installation, you know, there's going to be a significant amount of heavy equipment and heavy material movement needed to do that, to get aggregates in and to get soil and everything else done. Next slide, please. So the next one just shows basically where the hours are on our project, because as I've said before, there's very much a focus on construction and where that is being spent, and a significant amount of hours will go into the actual manufacture of our projects. And the government has given us a target for 50% of everything that we do to be done in the UK. So that's a lot of opportunity there. Next slide, please. So the next slide actually shows you what the government is thinking about opportunities, where they're actually focusing for as part of the sector deal and as part of their supply chain plans. And that's very much around the manufacturing of nacelles and towers, secondary steel, turbine installation, but also O&M and automation. Now, automation isn't something that we talk about an awful lot because people think that that's going to be jobs being lost for people going to computers. It's actually nothing like that. It's actually more around skilled operators doing operations remotely to keep themselves safe, but also to be more efficient in terms of managing and optimizing the wind farm. We're currently running at a high percentage of availability of our wind farms, but the hope is that by using new technologies, we'll be able to make them even more efficient and prevent breakdowns and prevent power outages before they actually happen. Now, when I actually saw this graph, I was actually kind of disappointed that the government isn't taking a much bigger view in terms of what we could actually achieve locally. If I can have the next slide, please. The next slide actually shows what could actually happen in the UK if we're supported in terms of our growth aspirations, in terms of factories and people to achieve net zero. So that would be, factories for cables, export cables, operation and maintenance, jacket manufacture, towers, blades, nacelles. And we don't just need one or two, we need multiple of each in order to support the growth of wind in this country. We just need a really good strategy from the government to support investment. And it's not just the developers, it's the tier one contractors who are absolutely vital in actually delivering on this strategy. Next slide, please. The next slide I'm going to show, obviously it's incredibly small and very difficult for you to read, but 2 years ago I was part of a study to see how much money Vattenfall had spent in the UK over the last 10 years, because that's when Vattenfall originally came to the UK. And what I've actually listed here is the top 100 suppliers for our offshore projects, our onshore projects, and our operation and maintenance. Now, obviously, I know you can't read that, but I'm going to be sharing all of this information onto the LinkedIn portal, so you'll actually be able to go in there, and then you'll be able to actually research directly the companies who actually supply us, because opportunities with Vattenfall are not massive directly. The majority of the opportunities with Vattenfall will be through tier one and SME contractors. So what I would say is I tend, after all of these webinars, I'll tend to get probably 150 messages saying, can you help me get a job? The answer is no, I can't. But what I would do is say, have a look at all of the companies that supply us, look at all of the companies that supply all of the other projects, which you can find out from companies like Eager or from 4C Offshore. You can actually look into who the supply chains are for each of these projects. And that will give you a really good starting point, because sometimes it's not always obvious who's supplying us. So have a really good look through this and actually see where that takes you to. That's actually it from me, but I am coming back to talk about I'm going to call it a journey. It sounds like I'm on X Factor, but I've not been really. I'm going to hand over to Celia Anderson from Renewable UK, who's going to talk about qualifications and training, which I'm sure a lot of you are considering if you're just about to leave. So that's some really interesting information, and I'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Rob. A really interesting background and very good presentation, which I think will provide a huge amount of the information that I regularly get asked for. I'm not forces background. My dad was in the signals, and my mother was a teacher in military schools. Large number of the rest of my family have been various bits of the military as well. I'm going to keep this fairly short. My current role is looking after the people and skills element within the offshore wind sector deal. And so it's my responsibility to work with the industry to put the initiatives in place that's going to help the industry scale up. Next slide, please. I'll gallop through my area. Lovely, thank you very much. There's certain priorities when you're actually looking at what skills you're going to need as you move towards a role within the industry. The top of the list is do anything that you can to make sure that your professional skills, your trade skills, your occupational skills are up to date. So whether it's if you're on the electrical side, you know, the 17th edition, plus anything else that clearly demonstrates that what you bring to the industry and your professional side, they should be your first priority. After that, research, follow companies, etc. I think I'm in the ideal position. I can point back to Catherine's slides where she was demonstrating the breadth of the industry, the geographical spread of the industry. James is going to touch on the structure of the industry, and I know Rob talked about it briefly then. And then Edwina gave you a huge amount about the breadth of roles and the skills, and then have a look at how you might fit into that. So there's a lot of information, particularly in this presentation, that will give you a very strong foundation. The third point, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but if you're looking for a job offshore, consider getting a job with a company that either is onshore or to work onshore to get your experience. It's a very, very good way to actually build your skill base and then look at what can you offer the offshore community. The next on the list, and James is going to cover this in more detail in a minute, which is about you will have heard about the working at height, sea survival, first aid, etc. You know, the GWO qualifications. They're not going to be the bit that get you the job, because the job is the skills. So make sure that you've got the job, the skills, the knowledge you need to come into the industry. And then you start looking at the other areas, which most cases are, I'll use the term very loosely, the passport to be able to work, the qualifications that you need. There's a couple of graphics on there. One of them you should recognise because Edwina mentioned the BVG Crown Estates guide. So that's the one on the right hand side. Another guide is the Offshore Wind Energy Guide. You'll find it on the Renewable UK publications. It's another free one. It's a shorter, another high level overview. And then there's the Offshore Wind Awareness course that's just gone online. It's another free introduction to the industry for the Energy Skills Partnership. There's plenty of information out there. There's some superb YouTube clips, so make the most of them. I'm going to hand over at this point on transition training to James Costello from Maersk Training, as he designed and ran a 5-year funded programme on transition, supporting people into the offshore wind industry, including a large number of military. So I think he's a better place to talk about this. Connect with me on LinkedIn if you think there's anything that I can do to help. So next slide, please, and over to you, James.
Hi everybody, thanks Celia. Yes, my name's James Costello. I work for Maersk Training, and I've been invited to speak on this call today because, as Celia mentions, we have run a number of courses over the years that are designed to help people to understand the industry and begin making those first steps towards getting a start. And a bit of background about myself. I've been with the company now for 6 years, and prior to starting with the company, I was a careers advisor. Hopefully what I'm going to try and do today is give a little bit of practical advice in terms of how you begin mapping out the industry and making the approaches that you need to make. And also to follow on from what Rob was saying with his slides and Edwina was saying with her slides regarding the sort of differences between the different employers and how you actually go about approaching them. We're going to mention training as well, and as Celia says, it's the GWO training is kind of the cherry on the cake, if you like. You need to make sure, first of all, that the industry is right for the skills and attributes that you have before you start going out and buying any training. So the first slide that I've got here is really just a very, very simple overview of the employers in the industry that you need to start considering. As Rob rightly mentions, there is a huge supply chain involved at every stage of the construction and operation of a wind farm, be it onshore or offshore. But you can kind of boil it down to three different types of employers. You've got wind farm owners, the energy companies that actually own the farm. You've got the wind turbine manufacturers, the people who make the machines that power the electricity. Typically, the wind turbine manufacturers and the wind farm owners are working very, very closely together, and you will see team members, technicians from the wind turbine manufacturer and the wind farm owner working on a site together. And then you've got the supply chain and the subcontractors, and by no means are the companies that I've linked on here an exhaustive list of all of these players. In fact, I would even go so far to say that the list that Rob showed is still not a true indication of every potential employer that you can be targeting. But it's just to give you a little bit of an idea. And just to be very clear, the roles that I have supported over the years, that we have supported over the years, are very blue collar. We support the people who are at the front line building and maintaining these wind farms. Can I just get the next slide, please? Great. So before you consider the approach that you're going to take to the wind energy sector, we think it's very important that you map out the employers that are in the industry. We think it's important that you increase your vocabulary regarding the wind energy sector, that you know the difference between a Siemens Gamesa and Vestas, and really start to map out all of the different employers and how you engage with them. Now, just spending a little bit of time on the training side of things, as Celia mentions, you really need to think about your skills and what skills and attributes you've got that you can bring into the industry before you start going off and getting any training, because this stuff can be quite expensive. Now, not to put anybody off, employers will often put you through the training as part of your induction, but some people choose to go off and get the training themselves as a way to improve their employability in the sector. I would like you guys to make that decision based on the research that you do yourself. But to give you an overview, the GWO, Global Wind Organization, a non-profit body. Now, the GWO is made up of all of the wind farm owners and manufacturers and key supply chain members. And even though it's not a legislative body and this training isn't a legal requirement, it is effectively agreed throughout the industry that the Global Wind Organization training is the standard that is expected. So the map on the right of the screen there shows you all of the GWO providers in the UK, and I've conveniently highlighted the NERSC training sites for you. But there, as you can see, there are a number of places you can go to get this training. It basically boils down to safety training and more specific technical training. On the left of the screen, you can see the GWO basic safety training, working at height, sea survival, first aid, manual handling and fire. That tends to be kind of ubiquitous across the industry. Every employer will expect you to have that, typically. And then you get into more specific elements, which are generally required from job to job. Advanced rescue training is more complex rescue procedures, and a lot of employers will expect you to have that when their farms are in particularly remote locations or far from shore. The basic technical training, again, job specific. It tends to be people who are installing or commissioning or maintaining the turbine themselves that will need the basic technical training. But all of this training varies from site to site. Some employers will require you to have one set of training, another employer will have a different expectation. It really varies from job to job. And this is why it's very important, and I'll keep coming back to this point, that you do a lot of your own research and make a lot of your own judgments on what the right path is for you in the industry. And we're more than happy after this session, because I've only got a little bit of time, we're more than happy after this session to answer any questions that anybody has about how to effectively map out the industry. But this is an overview of the training that is generally required for you. Slinger Signaler, just for your own reference there, is about heavy lift projects, so very much for the construction side of the life cycle of a farm. And blade repair kind of does what it says on the tin. But again, we can talk about this in more detail on a one-to-one basis. Could I get the next slide, please? So where do you go from here? Now, I think it's very important that you work towards increasing your vocabulary when it comes to the wind energy sector. Understand who is who. Rob's list before was fantastic. I'm really pleased that he shared that, because what I recommend is, and this is me putting on my careers advisor hat, if you're interested in the sort of blue collar roles in wind, you need to know who the employers are. You need to know who the wind farm owners are. You need to know who the manufacturers are. And you need to know who the subcontractors and supply chain are. And you're almost attacking on a combined front. You're applying for opportunities with the wind farm owners. You're applying for opportunities with the manufacturers, and also investigating opportunities with subcontractors. And we think that's the best way you can maximize the likelihood of you getting a start in the industry. You need to connect your skills and your attributes to the roles that you have uncovered. Once you have begun mapping out the industry, you will get a better understanding of the roles and where they fit into the life cycle of a farm. That'll give you a better understanding of the skills that are required. But don't just focus on the technical skills. They are very, very important, but also the attributes and personal attributes that you have are just as important. It's very, I would say it's fair to say that a lot of people we've seen get a start in the industry, it isn't just their technical skills, it's their attributes, their personal attributes, and military leavers are very well thought of in that regard. Next, enhancing your skills. Do look into opportunities to gain the additional skills and training you need. Colleges up and down the country, East Coast College in East Anglia, Grimsby Institute, Newcastle College. A lot of education providers are now running renewable specific courses that will help you to enhance your skills. And finally, very important, do not just look for advertised vacancies. A lot of the opportunities that are available in this industry are not advertised. You need to be investigating your own opportunities. You need to be contacting employers. You need to be asking for advice and looking for opportunities. Again, we can give you some advice and guidance on that. Just feel free to get in touch. And yeah, I think that's kind of my final thought on this is don't just think that the advertised opportunities are a true reflection of the number of vacancies and opportunities in this industry. There is a hell of a lot out there for you to go for. And then that will do for me. I think it's back over to you now, Rob.
I think it is. I think it's me again. Yes, talking about myself, which is going to be quite uncomfortable actually, because you know, like a lot of people, I'm quite happy to talk about the job, but not myself. But there we go. Anyway, can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, like a lot of people, you know, who join the armed forces, I probably wasn't the most academic, didn't really enjoy school. So it was a case of finding something to do with the Isle of Wight not being terribly good in terms of employment at the time. It was just shipyards and aerospace. And they only took maybe 2 or 3 apprentices each year. So obviously it's very competitive to get in there. So I ended up going into the Air Force after failing to get into the Marines dismally by not being fit enough. Any Marines that are on the call now will be laughing at me hysterically. So yeah, I served in the RAF for 9 years, so stayed in a lot of nice hotels, but also ended up traveling to some of the less nice places in the world. But had a brilliant time with a lot of really good people. And it did put me in a really good position for coming out and working, you know, in different environments when I actually left. So next slide, please. So how it actually worked for me when I actually came to leaving was my brother worked in the shipyard and so did my father-in-law. Hopefully the next slide is going to come up soon. It's all gone a bit slow and laggy. Yeah, so I went to work in a shipyard, just driving a forklift and working in the stores there for a while. Ended up being very lucky in that I got an opportunity to actually go and work in the offices after a while when unfortunately one of the guys died in the office. Nobody else applied for the job, so rather fortunately I got offered the job on the basis that I would wear a tie in the office, and was I okay with that? So that's you know, I didn't feel patronised. I felt like they were just checking me out. It's just one of those things. That shipyard was actually bought by Babcock, bless them, from Scotland, who actually made everybody redundant and closed the shipyard. So really luckily for me, NEG Micon, who are part of the Taylor Woodrow Group, had just opened a factory in 2002 on the Isle of Wight building wind turbine blades. And at that time, they were 23 and 26 metre long turbine blades. made of wood and fiberglass. That was actually bought by the company that is now MHI Vestas, who actually now still have 2 or 3 production facilities on the Isle of Wight and on the south coast. A lot of the friends that I made then I'm still really good friends with, who still actually work there after all of these years. And I actually managed to get a job there in buying, because what you'll find in the renewable energy industry is as Celia and James have said, if you show interest in some other areas, you do get opportunities, because they're such new industries. People don't, people haven't spent 20 or 30 years in this industry. It's all quite new, and within a short space of time, you can get a high level of expertise. I was really lucky in that when I actually left Gurit, who are a composites company that supply all of the wind turbine manufacturers, I got offered a job working at Energy up at Swindon, working on wind farms up off the coast of Liverpool. From there, I then went to work at Scottish Power, which is Iberdrola, and then I've finally ended up working at Vattenfall, which is, in my opinion, the best of the developers to work for. Something that you guys will understand is about working environment and the people that you work with, and I just find that this environment works best for me compared to some of the other places that I've worked. So I'm very happy to work here with a very nice bunch of people. Next slide, please. So what does my role actually cover? I look after procurement and supply chain for UK projects. I've also been involved with France and Poland on various supply chain engagement tasks. And very much, my role is around making sure that Vattenfall has the best products and the best people to deliver our projects on time. Vattenfall in itself doesn't actually build anything. It's very much the supply chain that deliver our projects on time and to budget and safely, which is obviously critically important. So my role is very much around evaluating suppliers, making sure we use as many local suppliers as possible, making sure that those local suppliers are also using local people and material and equipment where they possibly can, which can be a challenge, really. Final slide, please. So transferable skills. I mean, obviously, coming from a forces background, you'll all be very used to being adaptable and working under pressure and having hopefully a good sense of humour, although my wife will tell you that I'm pretty miserable most of the time. I try to retain a sense of humour when everything's going wrong, like we're not getting consent for our projects, even though we've spent years and millions of pounds on them. My advice very much is for people looking to join the industry to be patient and look for different routes in, as James and Celia have said. It's not always obvious the routes that are going to lead you in. And I'm actually going to share a list of hundreds of suppliers who have registered with us. And EGA also have a list of hundreds of members that you can start researching and looking for ways in. Don't just focus in on the turbine suppliers, as James has said, or Vattenfall or SPR or whatever. There are hundreds of opportunities for you from there. If you look at even construction companies like McKinney & Construction, if you look at Morrison's, if you look at Amy, Balfour Beatty, all of these companies, Siemens, are really involved with with offshore and onshore wind projects. And what I would say is offshore is kind of slow at the moment because we're having trouble with consenting, but onshore is really going to pick up soon, as is solar and as will ScotWind in the north. So if you're thinking of working out of Scotland, which some people won't do because it's away from home and they've got to relocate, that's going to be a great opportunity for people going forward, probably from 2025 onwards. So look where the money's spent, look who the companies are that are getting that money, and those are your targets right there. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand back over to Gemma and James, who are going to do some Q&A. Thank you very much for joining, and hopefully you'll join the LinkedIn group and enjoy it. Oh, I forgot to say Wales is excellent as well. They're going to be doing a lot. Thanks, Katrin.
Good morning. So we will pick up on the questions just now. So my name's Gemma Head. I'm Skills for Energy Programme Manager at EGA, and I'm going to be monitoring the questions with James Moore. Do you want to introduce yourself, James? think you're on mute, James. I think James might just be having a couple of technical issues. So so in the interest of time, just while are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry about that. Yeah, a couple of technical issues. My name is James Moore. I'm the Employer Engagement Manager for CTP. So I've been working with Vattenfall, Eager and their partners to, get these presentations out to you, the service leavers and the veterans as an audience. So we're going to move straight on to the questions. So the first question I had was from Dave. And that's about the slide that showed the number of companies. And I think Rob may have answered this actually, but we'll ask it again in case anybody's missed it. Where's the best place to find out more information about the companies? And Dave said he's based in the west of the UK.
Dave, are you just limiting yourself to the west of UK? Are you not going to look any further than that? That would be my first question back at you. But I would say look at the Vattenfall website, our supply chain area. We list a whole lot of information and reports that we've done at various events over the last 2 years. If you send me a LinkedIn request with your service details, I will add you into the Vattenfall service leavers group and serving members group, where I'm adding all of the supply chain companies that deal with us. There'll be probably 400 to 500 company names going in there on a list. And they are all over the UK, everywhere, from right down in Penzance, we have an office, all the way up to the tip of Scotland, and there's going to be a whole lot more in Scotland and Wales going forward as we expand out across the UK. Vattenfall is only in Europe, and that's very much our focus, unlike some of the other developers. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's just the way we operate. We're focused on Europe. 4C Offshore is excellent as well. Do your research.
Thank you for that, Rob. Handed across to Gemma now, who's going to ask the next question.
Thank you, James. Other James, have you got a question, or your hand is raised? If not, I will move on to the next question.
Yeah, it was just a little bit of a tip that we've always found works quite well when it comes to kind of researching and mapping out the industry. So LinkedIn is actually a very powerful tool for research as well as introductions. And what I would recommend is increasing the number of connections that you have who work in the industry. But as you're building up your connections, look at the work history of the individuals who you are connecting with. So if you're connecting with 100 different wind turbine technicians, and you go through the job history of every one of them and make a note of every company that they worked for, you'll very quickly come up with a quite comprehensive list of the employers that are relevant to the specific role that you're trying to do. And another handy little tip as well is you put a little asterisk when you're building your list of employers. You put a little asterisk next to the company that gave that individual the first job, because that will then give you a more refined list of companies that have in recent history hired somebody from outside of the industry to come into it. So it's just a little bit of a tip there on how to build your lists and how to refine them. That's it.
Thank you, James. I think, given time, we'll do one more question. And as I've mentioned in the chat, any that we haven't picked up on, we will get answers out to you. So please bear with us, and we will get some responses out following the webinar. So the other question that I will pick up on, so noting the forecast growth in workforce, my area of interest is learning and organisational development, particularly technology enhanced learning. How is the industry scaling up people development? And that came from Evan Flockhart.
Well, I can have a go answering that. It's Catherine. Obviously, I'm not an engineer. I have got a science background, but I don't really use that an awful lot in my day-to-day job, as well as, going to have a big gap in STEM type skills. Some business skills are also going to be in the kind of most wanted list as we go into the future. So I think if you have a sort of a business head on, you're good at systems thinking, you like thinking about complex projects, there's also going to be lots of opportunities for you. But the process of getting experience is going to be very similar to what other people have described. The important thing is do your research and be active and be visible and just show your worth.
Thank you, Catherine. And I can see Celia also had her hand raised. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Celia.
Thank you, Gemma. Just very briefly, I think as a result of the people and skills work that's going on related to the sector deal, we're developing the initiatives to ensure that we can upskill at industry level. Obviously, companies will be doing their own thing where necessary, but particularly if we look at hopefully some good news over the next couple of days, where we will need to start looking at significant ramping up of the industry. There will be more that needs to go on. But Evan, if you want to talk to me offline, I'm quite happy to pick it up direct with you.
Thank you, Celia. I think, James, unless you've got anything to add, I'll hand back to Rob.
No, thank you, Gemma.
Okay, brilliant. We'll hand back to Rob, and thank you for all of your questions.
Thanks, Gemma. There we go, kept to time, 1 minute over, some great questions there. And again, another set of fantastic presentations. I'd just like to thank Catherine, Edwina, Rob, Celia, James and Gemma for assisting for today. As we said, any questions that weren't answered, we will endeavour to get those answers put on and sent out to the relevant people that asked it. Just to finish up, we've got 2 more webinars coming up on the 7th to the 14th July. The details are on screen now. Again, you can register like you did previously. If you've got any questions, as I said, you can obviously get in contact with the EAGER team at www.eager.com. We can then put you through to anyone that you're trying to get hold of. And for us, just want to say a massive thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. As I said, it'll be recorded and we will be sending this webinar out later on today. So just bear that in mind. It does take a few hours to get through to us. Then we'll send it out to everyone that's registered today. All right. So enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe, everyone. And if you've got any questions or any points you want to raise, then please do let us know and get back to us. All right. Have a great day, and we'll all speak to hopefully see you soon at some point. Thank you very much. Bye bye.